Hello, everyone. This is Stephen, and welcome to Democracy Demythologized. Today, I'm talking with Sarah Bashir. Her family is originally from Sudan, but she grew up in a mix of the UAE and the UK. And she's talking about her experiences currently living in Dubai and how she uses anthropology to think about what's been going on in Sudan and the experiences of people in the Sudanese diasporic community, so people from Sudan who are living in other parts of the world. She focuses on how she works as an activist and a community builder, both in her home area in Dubai and also from afar in Sudan. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Sarah Bashir. Sarah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I guess we're gonna talk a lot, maybe in particular about Sudan, but we're both in very different parts of the world. If I understand right, you're in Dubai, and do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a Sudanese British social anthropologist trained at the London School of Economics. My work focuses on the intersections between food, care, displacement, and political violence, particularly how large-scale crises like war and famine are lived and felt in everyday life and practices. So academically, my background is in social anthropology, as I mentioned, with a strong engagement in political economy, post-colonial theory, and affect theory. My dissertation in particular used autoethnography to examine Sudanese food practices as sites of love, memory, and loss, especially in the context of genocide. And it was also a place where I was able to further expand my understanding of indigenous epistemology. Alongside academia, I've worked in humanitarian spaces and policy adjacent spaces. So currently I write policy at NATO, including I've had experience at the United Nations World Food Programme in Dubai, Amnesty International at LSE, and development projects in Cambodia as well. I've also worked in food research and recipe development at Meta, which is something that I'm currently doing. I'm self-employed in that. It's also just, I'm really fascinated about concepts of nationalism because growing up, as you mentioned, in Dubai, you just automatically become a third culture kid, wherein you don't have a stable sense of or definition of home. So nationality, patriotism has always fascinated me because it's something that's just foreign to me. Authenticity, cultural ownership, like things like that have always been so fascinating to me, which is why I was drawn to anthropology. And I'm interested in really one core question, which is how do people continue to care or fail to when political systems collapse? So how do people exist in the margins of change, of regime replacements, so on and so forth?
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I can relate to having kind of a much more distant sense of home, and I think it's a very important question to try to figure out how people respond and what people do when the systems around them collapse. I maybe so far at a high level, I mean, what have you learned? Like you grew up in Dubai, maybe. Sorry, I needed a second to figure out how to phrase the question.
No
but
worries.
what have you learned from all of this about? Yeah, we'll focus for now on Sudan because that question could go in a lot of different directions. What have you learned about Sudan and how people respond in Sudan and like in all this research?
So my research, as I mentioned, was about food in particular. And I think it's something that gets overlooked quite because and that's the beauty of anthropology is we take the ubiquitous and we complicate it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that in terms of how people respond is, so I am a self-trained chef, and I have a lot of people, friends and colleagues that are also chefs. And one thing that we noticed as members of the Sudanese diaspora, when I was in London for 6 years, is all of a sudden when the war struck in 2020, I think it was 2023, April of 2023. We realized that there was something within our bodies that kind of restricted our creative sensibility to continue to cook. And it wasn't something that was like explicit, but it was in the everyday acts of like, you know what, instead of sauteing or making something really elaborate or creating a roux and all of this, I'm just gonna have a slice of toast. And then that went on to, you know what, I'm just going to grab a meal deal on the way to uni. Or, you know what, I'm just going to have some like instant noodles. And it was like a distancing from the internal creative force within us, because it felt almost wrong to indulge and almost become gluttonous when there's people are basically dealing with a state-sanctioned genocide and famine. So it felt almost wrong. But then I went to a viewing for one of my a friend that I met who was a chef, and he created a cookbook. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's somewhere in the corner, tucked in the corner there, but it's called The Sudanese Kitchen. And he created a beautiful cookbook, and we had a very long conversation because I was very vulnerable and forthcoming about this, because I felt like a lot of Sudanese people, just in the diaspora in particular, because that's where my positionality, they felt like they just couldn't connect, or we didn't know how to advocate for our people, our fallen brothers and sisters in Sudan, food-wise. So, but he mentioned to me that as a creative, which is something that I think chefs often forget that we are, we have the cultural responsibility to champion through joy as a form of resistance, and that takes the form of using food as a tool for kinship and continuing to cook and pass on recipes from through our oral traditions and translating it into, in his case, for example, a recipe cookbook, or in my case, creating content on it on Instagram through my page. And so that's something that I've actively been trying to engage, and realizing that in my continuation and in my ability to not succumb to the state-sanctioned depression of what's been happening in our global state is my form of resistance. So that's really mainly the conclusion that my research brought me to, and about really listening to the signals and signs that your body is telling you and showing you. It's not always a cognizant mental thing that's happening. You learn, and your body is one huge sponge. And I think it's not just the head that's telling us things, it's also the body. It's the hands as a chef or as a painter, or what your eyes, the smells, the olfactory systems. So that is something I really tapped more into sensory anthropology in my last year of uni. And so, yeah, that's kind of a broad overview of what I took away from my research.
There you go. I mean, that's really cool. One thing this reminds me of is, and there are a lot of anthropologists who will study this, but around almost habit formation and how our bodies are almost these feedback loop processes, and the things we do with our bodies kind of build habits or dispositions over time that can also shape how we think and how we operate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe what was it like growing up as I guess as a Sudanese woman, but you grew up, tell me if this is wrong, but you grew up mostly in Dubai and then went to university in London. But what was it like growing up in this kind of mix of the Middle East and Europe?
So I was actually born in Yorkshire, which is the north of England. Mm-hmm. And I moved to Dubai when I was 8, and then moved back to London in 2019, which is when I was 18. So I would say growing up in Dubai was very, very interesting, to say the least. So when I was back in Yorkshire, I was in a predominantly white town. So again, that was very interesting, because I felt it really starts to. I recently reread the work of Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but he talks about. Of course, right. And he speaks about how it's colonization's the nefarious part about it is that it operates on a psychological level, because you start to identify with white supremacist tropes and like types, right? Ideal types, to speak about Bourdieu, to mention Bourdieu, but you kind of start to internalize that, in that when I was in Huddersfield, I kind of saw myself through a lens of whiteness. And then when I came back to Dubai, a lot of my friends in the UK think that, they have, like, of course, this romanticization of the East, where it's like, it's like devoid of racism, which is the furthest thing from the truth. I always say one thing is, the only universal truth is anti-blackness. That's something that you'll find everywhere. And so, I did definitely deal with that growing up in high school. And I also felt like I had to, because there was only like one or two of us in the whole grade cohort, I felt like I almost had to become like the mystical Negro, the all-knowing Negro, in that I had to understand why like rates of black on black crime were the way they were in America. At the same time, I needed to understand apartheid in South Africa. I needed to understand Arab supremacy in Sudan, and it was just very fascinating. So I feel that's also a reason why I became an anthropologist, almost to spite people. I was like, I need to make sure that I'm the smartest person in the room at all times. And then politically, being in Dubai definitely made me tone deaf, because you're living in a state of constant comfort and luxury. And I always say to my friends, Dubai is neo-imperialism and neoliberalism on E, like just final boss. You're living in a perpetual mall. Everything can be delivered to you within 15 minutes. And so it's really easy to forget the world and just live in your comfort and gluttony and sedimentary lifestyle. It's difficult to get 10,000 steps a day. It's so difficult. Wherein when I went to London, and when I was 18, it was such a culture shock, because in Dubai, I grew up where homelessness is illegal. And when I was in London, I was like, oh, I'm met with having to interact with people that are unhoused. And so that was even a culture shock for me. You aren't allowed to unionize in this country. So people protesting, all of that is completely illegal. So going to the UK and seeing people marching as students as well, it's crazy, because I realized that I have my own political leverage and agency, which, once you open your eyes to it, you really can't shut your eyes again. So coming back to Dubai now as an adult was very interesting, because you start to see the seams of where the mirage kind of dissipates, and you see the smoke and mirrors for what it really is. But at the same time, you can't really do much, because, like I said, you're really limited in your agency. I mean, it only takes one call and I'm deported. So I've tried to really traverse it in a very strategic way, wherein I focus my political advocacy abroad. Or I would be, so I have a Substack where I publish essays. So I do that, and I kind of decode and kind of speak in Morse code where I need to make sure that I am within code, but still feeling like I'm doing something. And I feel like it's my duty, especially as someone who is trained in social anthropology, went to a very liberal university, was heavily engaged in leftist spaces and organizations, that I continue that legacy. It would be very bizarre if my leftist friends who I used to protest with would just see me on Instagram on a yacht in Dubai, just like like nothing is happening. So yeah, I definitely say growing up in Dubai is not the end of the world, but I think it's important, especially if you have children here, that you need to like take them out of the country at least once a year, let them see what's happening, engage them with news channels that aren't just like state sanctioned and backed, so that they get like a really broad global political perspective on the world.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, that makes sense. It does seem like, from what you're saying, it seems like Dubai is a bit of a bubble for better or for
For
worse.
sure.
And I mean, one broad thing that your story reminds me of is a number of my black friends who specifically moved to different parts of the world, almost like as part of the cross cultural adjustment, they almost have to get used to how racism manifests in that place versus where they're from. So like I'm thinking of like one of my friends who moved from France to New York City would be a good, like I almost had to like, it took her like a couple months to really understand how racism manifested in the US and in New York versus her hometown in Paris. And this kind of reminds me, it seems like for you, you had these different environments and you almost both had to get used to racism in the environments, but then you're also like, I need to make sure I understand all forms of this so that you can kind of stay on top of it. It sounds like, is that
Yeah,
fair or yeah.
for sure. Yeah, because it's such a melting pot. So you felt like you had to really understand, because there's only there's a scoop of black people here. So it's like you really, to create community, it's important to know what's happening in Congo, what's happening with in Burkina Faso, what's happening with Caribbean people and African Americans and Sudanese people. Like, it's really important to foster that sense of community. So yeah, I would say exactly what you said.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And this the quote unquote scoop of black people in Dubai, are they do they tend to be from certain places, or are they kind of truly global in that some of them maybe are from Sudan, some of them are from Burkina Faso, some of them are Afro-Caribbean, or do they tend to kind of be from certain spaces?
It's really a mixing pot. Like, they're from everywhere. There's really, I couldn't say that there's one particular type. I guess it depends on vocationally, I would say. So like you would tend to see a lot of West African people working in places like the cosmetic spaces. You would see like, so yeah, West African and East Africans tend to work in like salons. You would see more West Africans working service jobs. In terms of, I don't know why, but it's a very niche. But in terms of like driving institutes, they tend to be a lot of Sudanese people work there. But yeah, other than that, I would say that you will meet black people from every corner of the world in
Mm.
Dubai.
There you go. I mean, that kind of reminds me of New York City, where maybe in contrast to most parts of the U.S., where the majority of black people are, you could say, African American, are communities of black people who have been in the U.S. for a long time. There's a lot of black populations in New York City specifically, whether that's Afro-Caribbean, Nigerian American, and that gives a bit of a different demographic breakdown, black
Mm-hmm.
people, and kind of makes those communities a bit more cosmopolitan or internationally focused. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I guess so. It you were talking. I guess what was it like? Um, how did growing up in a mix of Dubai and the UK influence your understanding of what's been going on in Sudan as a Sudanese British or Sudanese Dubai person? I don't know the right way to describe your identity because you've moved around so much, but yeah, how has that influenced your perspective on the things going on in Sudan?
So kind of going back to what I was saying, you can't you it's near impossible to be politically active in this country. And so even though some of the most major actors are coming from within this space, and I'm, again, choosing my language very carefully when I say this, it you feel like you're being gaslit, because it's like I can see what's happening, but I can't really speak about it. Wherein when you're um, in the Western world, it's almost, especially particularly in left spaces, which is the only positionality that I can speak of, it feels like you're constantly doing like theoretical Olympics. You're doing struggle Olympics. How woke are you Olympics, which is really, really just a waste of time. Where it's like, okay, I learned about the Nakba in Palestine, but have we spoke about Sudan? Oh, you spoke about Sudan, but have you spoke about Congo? And it's just like such a waste. It's so futile. But at least when you're in London and in the Western world, you are able to be politically active, and you have that responsibility, especially as someone like yourself is university trained and has an understanding of anthropology. You really have to put your money where your mouth is and like really be on the front lines, especially as like I think about people like Walter Rodney, for example, who used his pen and his positionality as an academic to push, like to create the momentum for radical change. And I feel like that is what limited the limited capacity that I'm able to do. That is why I started my Substack. I actually never thought myself as a writer until I came to Dubai and realized that that might be the only outlet I can use to remain politically engaged with the world. Wherein when I was in London, of course, I was donating, I was at rallies, I was at spoken word nights, there was like music festivals for independent Sudanese artists. I was going to food festivals for Palestine. I was protesting. I was boycotting. I still do boycott, even here. But I was also just really trying to get myself out there. Like I was going on student boycotts. I was in the Palestine Student Association, the Sudanese Student Association. I was also part of the Afro-Caribbean Society. And yeah, I was really, really getting out there. So again, I've only been here since August of 2025. And just coming back again, it's like the world goes mute and you realize, okay, what can I still do? Because the first 2 months, I'll be honest, it was very much like, I'm just going to do what everyone else does. I'm just going to go to the mall, get a cute drink, get some food, go shopping, come home, go to work. But I was like, I actually have a responsibility, because the way that the Western world works and the way colonialism works, it's not just about slave ownership. We're in the dawn, the age of neo-colonialism, wherein it's about how can we how can we colonize the mental space of people. And I think the best way that they do it is through brain drain, where you become Western trained, but instead of returning back to Africa or your your native land, you remain in the West. So one thing that I'm really passionate about is turning back and going towards Sudan. Of course, it's not stable and safe yet, but that is the end goal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this makes sense. I think one of the closest parallels for me in my personal life to what you're talking about is, I don't think I talked about this too directly on this channel before, but I'm currently traveling the world, so I'm currently in Southeast Asia. But I think as I've when I decided to do that, a lot more kind of local or like in-person forms of doing activities, like what you said, going to various events and things like that, were no longer really possible in the same way. So I started to think about, well, what kind of things can I do? And then you talked about writing. I guess for me, the podcast kind of came out from that. It was more like, well, I can talk to people virtually no matter what continent I'm on. and I'll use that to kind of understand people's stories and then help people understand what's going on in the world. I One thing I'm a bit curious about for you, and this is something for me because I'm currently very far away from my local context, but with what you're talking about at the end, what does it look like for you to kind of either give back to Sudanese communities or to work with Sudanese communities where you are right now?
So it starts with the small embodied practices in your day to day, and it's about intentionality. So I actively choose to engage with Sudanese literature, engage with independent Sudanese literature when I'm reading. I'm on I have a goal for the year to read read a book every 3 days. So always I try and do that. And when I'm writing my essays on Substack, I always mention to cite. And I wrote an essay about how citations can be a site of can be a ceremonial site wherein you basically position indigenous scholars in a place of you give them their reverence and you treat their stories seriously. I'm thinking of the work of Savannah Shanj when I say this in her work on Black Girl Ordinary, where she speaks about how you refuse the notion of a black girl magic and you basically become ordinary as a form of resistance. And you also use she coined the hashtag cite her name, wherein she only used Black women scholars in her writing. So that's something that I do in terms of like my advocacy. I also still donate where I can. I have a long-term goal of creating a food bank. That is not technically illegal. So aid, one thing about the West, they love aid. So any form of aid, they love that. It's the whole dependency theory as outlined by Walter Rodney. And what else do I do? I still cook. So on my social media platforms and where I'm visible, I do cook, and where I can, I embed strategically again pockets of information where I can keep my users engaged with the world around us, and also just being radically happy, choosing joy every day as a political choice. I have cousins and uncles that have passed, unfortunately, during this time of unrest. And I know that even the family that I do have that are still in like Khartoum, which is the capital, or just in other places of Sudan, I know that Al-Fashir right now is going through a lot. They would not want to see me miserable on their behalf. I think they'd really want to see me, to be colloquial, they just want to see me live it up and be happy. I know that my dad put me in contact with one of my cousins, and he was like, she just wants to know what your days are like. And I know that there's this, especially being in left spaces and studying at a liberal university, you come across a lot of white guilt where they feel like, oh, I'm so sorry, and I'm perpetually just in a state of just a perpetual apologist, and I feel like I need to be sad and upset and almost they extend their outrage in spaces and places that you never even as a Black woman thought, oh, I didn't even know they were being racist like that, but okay. And it's just like, that's not the space I come from at all. Like, I really try and smile, be happy, dance, sing, cook, host supper clubs, just anything I can to foster community, because that's how evil intercepts, is when you're isolated. So I really try and foster community with especially knowing how low spirits are for the Sudanese community in the diaspora.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I mean, why do you think the spirits are so low in the Sudanese diaspora? Is it like they're kind of frustrated with what's going on in Sudan? Is it they've been kind of whacked down from the tedium of their life and work in the places that they are, or what do you think has led to that? And I do agree with you. I think in many ways, living joyfully can be, in the current environment, is kind of an act of protest, or it can be. It's also just practically like we should be happy and joyful. That's an important thing in life.
Yes.
But yeah, what do you think impacts the Sudanese diasporic community?
A mixture of what you mentioned already, but I would also say it's the helplessness, especially when you're in a country, like when you're in the West or in spaces that are complicit, actively complicit in what is happening, and they have it's within their political interest to see your people and your homeland be denigrated. It's very helpless because the place and the economy that you are contributing to is directly causing the downfall of your people. But it's also like, what am I supposed to do about it? Do I stop working? Do I stop providing and putting food on the table for my family in an act of protest? Or do I try and dismantle these systems from the inside? And then I think back to like Audre Lorde, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. So it's like, okay, do I become an anarchist? And so it's helpless. And also when you're a leftist, like I said, it really becomes the oppression Olympics, where it's like, okay, I can't fully express my outrage for what's happening to my family in Sudan because what about the people in Palestine? What about what's happening in Congo? And so you become splintered. But I think when you start to compare suffering, again, it's just a tool of white supremacy. They won infighting. So if you're outraged, be outraged. I'm surprised that people aren't throwing tantrums and crying more. Like, I think we should entitle ourselves to the full range of our human emotion. And again, it's about fostering community, looking out for people, checking in on your friends more, because it is a difficult time. Like, this is not normal. Not to say that it's unprecedented. We've definitely seen the rise and fall of fascism. I mean, I just published an essay about nostalgia, and the use of nostalgia as a tool and vehicle for fascism. It feels novel, but it really is it's not unprecedented. And I think it's about engaging with the world around you radically, especially as an academic. We have I think about the work of Stuart Hall and about the coders and the encoders and decoders, and who is the professional script writers and the people that imbue narratives like the hegemonic codes with legitimacy, and it is us academics. So we have the responsibility, the moral responsibility, to engage with our surroundings radically and vigilantly and empathetically as well, not coming from like a place of the ivory tower, but like that we're peering down. I think of like armchair anthropology back in the day, but participant observation, really getting in there, helping out, mutual aid, especially when morale is so low, especially in the diaspora, because you already have the language barrier, the cultural barrier. So that doesn't mean that you are less Black or less Sudanese or less African, but it means that you just need to really be there for your friends and family more.
Yeah, this makes total sense. And you've done a lot of work with NATO. I'm a bit curious, like what do you do, and how does that fit in with all of this?
Yeah, so I'm a One Young World Scholar. It's a new foundation in collaboration with the United Nations and NATO. And my focus is on global security. And so I when I was also working at the United Nations World Food Programme, I specifically focused on the Rohingya genocide. And I was looking at efficacy. So a lot of my policy work was about internal efficacy in terms of internal systems. They had a system where they were creating refugee cards, and the card would entitle you to a specific amount of caloric intake in the day. and the food that was being prepared was like, think of like space food that's like packaged in silver plastic, and it's like a bar of mush, but it has all of your nutrients for the day. And one of the policy that I proposed was in giving refugees a sense of dignity. I mean, you're already creating a dependency complex because you're not giving them the tools to, lift themselves out of their current political situation. So you might as well give them the option of choice, or at least the illusion of choice in what they're eating. So that was something that I focused on heavily, and then got passed. I'm also looking at, so my current role, some of the things that I'm looking at is feminine hygiene security. So it really is the intimate, and that's what I love about anthropology, to go on a tangent, is about it complicates the ideas of the private versus public dichotomy, because what happens in your private life actually really does impact how you engage with people. And so it's about, one of the policies that I'm working on is about securing feminine hygiene for all girls in Africa, so that becomes something that's free. That should really be free everywhere. Another thing that I'm focusing on is trying to secure more aid. And like I said, the way that I practice my politics is dignity first, person focused first. And so I'm trying to secure aid for Sudanese people. And again, using my background as a chef, I'm trying to create food that is culturally relevant and a significant, because there's nothing that brings a smile to someone's face like a warm cooked meal.
Yeah, I mean, this makes total sense. What, quick side, but if I had read in some like dystopic novel, some kind of like, calorie count where everyone's only allowed to eat a certain amount of calories, I would probably read this and I'd be like, yeah, this is thematically significant, but this is probably a bit over the top. This would never actually happen in real life. And it's scary to think that's exactly, that's oh my gosh. I mean, as somebody who has, I guess, like specific digestive and metabolic issues, like sometimes I need to eat, my body might not digest all the food it's eating, so I need to make sure I eat more food. Like, there's just so many different sets of needs that humans are not a math equation like that. This many.
We're not a monolith, right? Yeah, we're not a monolith. And it's like, you can't treat, just because someone is stateless or without documentation, that does not mean that you are not human. I think to what's happening in America with undocumented migrants and things happening with ICE. And it's like, they almost get, of course they get, fascism loves to scapegoat migrants and blame everything on immigration. But also it's like, these people are people. They deserve the right to eat what they want, dress how they want to dress, collect, create community, dance, sing, play, work, love. And so, that's definitely something that I'm trying to bring back, the humanity back into humanitarian work.
Yeah, this makes sense. I guess with the food bank in particular, so you're starting a food bank. Does that involve?
It's a long-term goal.
It's a long-term goal. Okay. Would that involve food in Dubai, food in Europe, or food like collecting money for food to make for food to like produce food in Sudan, or kind of what's your vision for that?
So two things. I want to create, there's a charity-based cafe in London, in Whitechapel of East London, and it's called Route 52, and they are a not-for-profit cafe, and they host independent artists. They organize protests, and they also they employ local chefs, and the food is always culturally relevant. They have supper clubs and all of this. So that's like the established part. I would love to have my own like cafe, restaurant, I already have like the name and everything. And then I also want to obviously have a place where I pool food, resources, clothes, feminine hygiene, and also send monetary donations back to Sudan so that people can have the choice to buy the food that they want to buy. I also, like I mentioned, I was at the literature festival and I met with Asma Khan, who is she's an Indian woman who is a author, but she's also has the only fully woman-run kitchen in London, and at her price point, she is the only women-run kitchen in the world. And it's beautiful because she empowers women that are all, her entire staff also is above the age of 50. So she employs women that tend to be invisibilized by capitalism, and she gives them their reverence and the opportunity to become financially independent. I would love to take that to Sudan because I know that food culture is so big there. Food waste is massive there. And I know that women are such, in general, beyond food, are the transmitters of culture. And I would love to give them their reverence.
Yeah, this makes sense. This sounds like a very cool vision. I mean, it sounds like you're cooking it up, but at the same time, this does sound really, really cool. I'm curious as to what you build. And one other practical thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned feminine hygiene and ensuring that all women on the other side of what you do, that all women have access to feminine hygiene. How do you define feminine hygiene in this context, or like what things on a practical level do you want to make sure all women in Africa have access to?
So first, a major. Okay, so let's start with the most colloquially understood definition, denotation of it, which would be menstrual sanitary wipes, menstrual discs, tampons, and then in terms of on a macro level, it's about sexual education, sexual health education, the access to contraceptives, access to the ability to have safe pregnancies and birth and delivery, because Black women are the most likely demographic to suffer death in delivering children worldwide, even in the West, because for various political reasons, but also in a simple fact that Black women are not believed. It's the idea that you are the strong Black woman that can handle pain. And I always say white women tears really do run the world, because the same pain could be shouted by a white woman and get heard by millions and move mountains, but a Black woman crying in the delivery room. I recently read a story about a Black woman in America who was crying that she was going to go into labor, and she was being forced to fill out forms that ended up costing her life. So it's about, having the right to a safe pregnancy, and also what that entails on the part of the partner and the woman herself, the vitamins that she needs to be taking, the supplements, how she should be sleeping, her diets. So yeah, that's kind of how I would define it.
Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, that's awesome. I guess yeah, I mean, these are important. I mean, there are people I've talked to a lot of people who talk about how I guess you could say broadly speaking, the sexual health or access to some of the materials for sexual health is that a lot of across the continent overall, or that there's a lot of countries in Africa where women have disproportionately very bad access to these kind of things. Their pain doesn't get taken seriously. They might be given less anesthesia in cases of going into childbirth. Yeah, I've definitely seen this. I guess in terms of like, I am curious about something you were talking about before, and I wanted to go in a little more depth onto this side of it. But you were talking about this kind of question among Sudanese people in Dubai about participating in the economy versus, like, feeding your family versus, this economy is also, or this society is also has a responsibility in kind of hurting my people. And I'm curious, as somebody who grew up there and then now has moved back. I guess now as an adult, because as a kid you probably had a very different relationship because you're still a kid and you're kind of learning the world from your environment. But what what have you done to kind of think about how to juggle between these two things and the kind of your livelihood versus also kind of concerns about contributing to the system, and then also using aspects of your livelihood and material upbringing to also help dismantle some of these problems?
So I would say I try to again remain politically informed as best I can. The all we're living in the dawn of techno feudalism, in the attention economy. They're trying to colonize our minds. I feel like I said this a lot, but I try my best to remain politically informed. That's really the best thing I can do. Empathy is a muscle. I always try and work that out as much as I can in the smallest acts. And I also, in terms of my livelihood, I just try and stay away. I know that I can't be fully politically engaged, but I try to at least work jobs that have this semblance of neutrality. I know neutrality is really a myth, but I try not to fall into the ease of the banality of evil, that I can just become a cog in the machine of evil. So I try not to work for governmental bodies, financial bodies like crude oil. I only try and engage in my personal life in sustainable practices. If there are places or organizations that I can boycott, that is outside my realm of immediate need. So, like, unfortunately, Amazon is something that has become ubiquitous and something that sometimes you really do need to use. But if I can try to buy locally, I try not to constantly order on Uber Eats because I know that they don't pay their employees the best. So if I can drive somewhere and get food, I would do that. And yeah, I mean, trying to have conversations where I can without jeopardizing my immediate circumstances. So, like, trying not to protest in a place where protesting is illegal. And finding novel ways to remain human. So for me, that's in writing and reading. So yeah, that's what I try and do.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that relates to the last question. The last thing you said connected to the question I was actually about to ask you, which is, you had mentioned this before, but you have a Substack. Do you want to describe what it is, and where else can people find you, or maybe in general, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work?
Yeah, so my Substack is available on. So the name of my publication is Garma 222, which is, sorry, let me just check because I think I do think I recently changed it. But let me just check. But I am available on Instagram as well and TikTok on Garma222, which Garma is it's GARMA 222, and it translates to just a bite in the Sudanese dialect of Arabic. I just thought it was like very cute and easily digestible, because I do like just bites of cultural analysis. Also, I do actually cook as well. So yeah, and then on Substack, it's just Garma Wabus. which means just a bite. So it's GARNAWABAS. I'm also available to connect on LinkedIn. So I'm just Sarah Bashir. Also, I do publish sometimes on Anthropology Digest under my name again. So yeah, that's where you can find me. Some of the topics that I write on really do range. So if you want to have, and I'm available online at different modalities depending on what your interest level is. The content stays relatively the same, but it's the format that changes. So on TikTok and Instagram, of course, it'll be quick reels, 60-second reels with like minimal reading. And that's really food focused. Whereas my Substack is where I am more politically engaged. Like I said, I recently wrote an article about nostalgia. I also write about things like pop culture and music is another one of my passions. So I write about the gender politics of women in rap. I also write about anime and cartoons and things that aren't as they seem. I recently wrote a piece about Avatar: The Last Airbender and how Ba Sing Se, one of the cities, is a cartoonized parallel to modern day fascistic regimes. It's just a range of things. I write about the art of loving. I recently finished reading Eric Fromm's The Art of Loving, and I wrote about how that translates to the idea of letting go, about first loves. I wrote about how my mom and the sweetness of her ability to raise me, how that molded me into the woman I am, and how empathetic I am. I'm currently in the process of writing a piece about my favorite academic supervisor. Her name was Dr. Imani Strong. She was a Black woman, and she was just everything I wanted to be, that I still want to be. And I dealt with a few issues with my mental health in my second year of uni. And I came to her office crying, and I was like, Imani, I'm dropping out. I can't handle it. So much work. Like, LSE is it's not the number one university for nothing. I'll just say, like, it's just a lot of work. And then she gave me this book actually called Exotic No More, and Anthropology on the Front Lines. And it's basically like a manifesto for social anthropology. And she basically said, if you read this book, and it basically translates anthropology into public anthropology, which is something, if you've noticed, is what I do with my writing and Instagram and TikTok. And she said, if you read this book, and after reading it, if you feel like you still don't care about this discipline, then leave. And so I spent the weekend reading the book and then decided to continue, and it was the best decision I'd ever made. So I'm currently writing my understanding of this book because I just think it's a phenomenal book written by Jeremy McClancy. So I'm reading this because I just think anthropology has such beautiful lessons that don't just exist on the margins of like taboos and really like unique indigenous cultures, but like indigenous epistemology is something that exists within contemporary society in metropolitan cities. Like, it's not just something that exists in like the far extremities of the world. So that is something I'm currently working on.
That's really exciting. I mean, yeah, this is really cool. And I'll try to include some links to the various things you just said in the description. So like links to the Substack, links to the Instagram, all those other things. I'm excited that, I mean, public anthropology is great, and I'm glad that you're writing and you're exploring writing. I mean, I think that was me a couple years ago, and I have done less of blogging now, but for a while I was like, this is my main venue, and at best it's a muscle, it's a skill to explore, and
For sure.
and it kind of remakes you, like any kind of skill or habit, and it can take you in interesting places.
For sure.
But yeah, thanks for taking the time now.
Yeah, of course. This was a lovely conversation.